degrees in argumentation and debate, I almost went to law school.
Oh gosh,
Yeah.
you kept your soul. That's amazing, though, that you chose
I
the other
well,
path.
my good friend is a judge. I don't know about that. I think I would have went into animal law somehow. I would have figured out a way to do that. But my good friend is a oh, I think we got it. My good friend is a
Nice.
judge, and when I got to that crossroads, he was the one that said, "Don't do it." Oh, I don't know it. So I think we got it. Okay, good. So we hopefully I can see it up now. So Lori, thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to give her a little plug if you ever need any technical support with this kind of stuff. Lori from Allied Exchange is fabulous and helps us with all of Joey's legacy stuff. So welcome. So I guess we're going to have to do some repeats. So if you were able to hear this and you were able to hear what we said, I apologize. You're going to have to hear it again. But on the show tonight, we have Anna. Now it's Rick or Dottie. I said it right?
Yep, you got it.
She taught me to say Rick or Dottie, and so but then I always forget about Rick. So, but Anna Riccardotti is one of the attorneys with Joey's Legacy, and she's out of Chicago, and she's going to be here to help us with any of the law questions that we have. And we also have Scott Fine, who we wouldn't have this organization at all without Scott. Unfortunately, it was because of the loss of his beloved dog, Joey, who was a beautiful dachshund. And I have had dachshunds myself, so I understand that bond with any animal. But we have that in common. So we're going to jump right into this since we've already taken up so much time of everybody's. And I'm going to have Anna explain to you, we're going to be talking about veterinary malpractice tonight. So Anna, can you please give that wonderful example that you already gave one more time?
No problem. I'll kind of cut to the chase, though, this time. Just that veterinarians are basically they're expected to know more than we know, because they went to school to become vets, they hold licenses. So they're held to a standard of care for providing those professional veterinary services. And if their actions fall below that reasonable standard of care for veterinarians, then they have committed veterinary malpractice. So in a civil case, if you want to prove veterinary malpractice, you have to show that the veterinarian's actions fell below the reasonable standard of care, and that but for that action, your animal would not have suffered the injury or damages your animal did suffer. And, as we mentioned a little bit before, sometimes it's pretty straightforward. If the veterinarian, let's say your animal had cancer in one leg and the veterinarian took off the wrong leg, that's pretty clear. That shouldn't have happened. Sometimes it requires, in that kind of case, you don't necessarily need another veterinarian to say there was a mistake, because it's really clear that was a big mistake.
Yeah.
The second example, or different examples, are maybe the veterinarian gave the wrong dosing of certain drugs. Like, for example, if they're using fentanyl during anesthesia, and say they gave 3 times the amount they were supposed to, and then your animal passed. You or I might not know that that's why your animal passed, because we don't do anesthesias every day. We don't have that knowledge. So when another veterinarian reviews the file, they can see that, like, oh my gosh, there's 3 times as much fentanyl as they should have been given. Clearly that's why. And that's a case of veterinary malpractice also. But it's different than ordinary negligence. Because if you're not expected to have any specific knowledge that is particular to being a veterinarian. Like if you're charged with the task of walking the dog, from the car into the vet clinic, and let's say the veterinarian does this and drops the leash, your animal gets loose and dies on the highway, then that's ordinary negligence and not necessarily malpractice, but still, you lose your animal.
Right.
But so vets can be responsible for ordinary negligence and malpractice. It's just that, with that malpractice, they're expected to have more knowledge, more than you or I would have. And they're held to that standard because that's the services they're selling.
Is there a certain level of like a percentage that would be like, let's use the example of negligence that you talked about. So let's say the veterinarian's taking the pet from the car which we're seeing a lot of. For a while there, I feel like I saw dogs running all over the streets, all over anywhere there was a vet hospital. It was really sad. But let's say the dog jumps on her, would they assign a certain amount so the dog jumps on her, knocks the leash out of his hand, runs down the street? Is she 100% negligent, or is there a percentage that would be
That's
put
tough
in.
to say. And it kind of, I think that's the sort of thing we were talking about earlier too, like that every state is going to be a little different in how they apply their laws. That's why when you call an attorney in Illinois about a question in Colorado, they can't answer it, because they're
Right.
not going to know the specific laws. We can talk about general concepts and legal concepts, but if there's a specific legal question, they've got to go to the jurisdiction because there's nuances in how it's applied. But that's usually considered some sort of like contributory negligence, or let's say let's say you have um, a dog that is absolutely terrified of the vet, and you don't mention it to the vet. You're like, here you go. No, it's fine. Fluffy's fine. Everything's going to be great. Just walk around in. Totally fine. And that clearly isn't true, and then, Fluffy, jumps all over. That could be partly on you because you didn't warn the vet about, the issues that they needed to take precautions for. So yeah, there can be, differences there. I don't know, every state's going to differ how they apply that kind of contribution, but yeah, there can be contributions. But when it comes to vet malpractice itself, you're really kind of, as the client in the pet being, your animal, your companion animal being the patient, unless you have some specific knowledge that you received from another vet that you're not sharing with this vet, or you're hiding, or I shouldn't say hiding, but you're not sharing some information that that's going to help that vet to best diagnose and treat your animal. It's sort of in the veterinarian's hands because they're the professional who's expected to have that knowledge. So for
Yeah.
ordinary negligence, yeah, I can see there might be situations where there's contribution, by someone who had information they should have shared or something like that. But
Yeah.
I think that's a harder situation in malpractice.
It happens a lot in just, for those of you who don't know, I was a vet tech for 12 years. I've worked with animals for 37 years. I am always amazed at how many times pet parents keep stuff from us. I don't really understand the reasoning behind it, but a lot of times they keep stuff from us. And, you're setting yourself up for failure if you do that, right? Because now it's going to be taken out of the hands of the veterinarians being their fault, and it's going to lean on you. So you really want to be open about everything. Yeah. Scott, in your case, obviously, when we're talking about standard of care and what we expect, a pet parent to know and a veterinarian to know, how did you find out that Joey needed to have the blood test? Was it another veterinarian that told you? Because you wouldn't have known that convenia could cause some problems on a pet with a failing kidneys.
Right, exactly. And that vet happened to be our very first vet that joined Joey's legacy after we formed it. I've just found her just randomly on the internet. I explained my situation and I said, would you mind reviewing these records? And I had already written a narrative about what I saw because I was in healthcare for 24 years. And of course, there's a lot of human healthcare for 24 years. And there's a lot of similarities. So I wrote the narrative. I sent it to her with the medical records. And she said, yeah, clearly labs should have been done to determine organ health. Had labs been done, they would have seen the kidney values or through the roof. And there are many other drugs that are renal friendly that would have worked well rather than the contraindicated convenia, clearly stated by Zoetis not to use with dogs and cats with renal dysfunction. But of course, we didn't find that out till 30 hours later the next day. And by then, Joey was in bad shape, and the prognosis was deemed very poor. So yes, I confirmed that with an independent vet who became our first vet. Unfortunately, she took on some other projects, and she's not with us any longer. But wonderful lady out in Arizona, and I'll always be grateful to her.
So what did the original vet say? Did the original vet realize his mistake and come clean, or just completely try to push it under the rug? What were you dealing with?
The original vet, I brought Joey there, went in the exam room. This was the substitute vet. This was not Joey's regular vet. He wasn't there that day. And I dare say if he had been there that day, there may not be a Joey's legacy, but that's speculation. The sub vet examined Joey from nose to tail, did a quick physical exam, turned around and walked out of the room. And I had asked him, I said, what are you going to do? He said, well, someone will be right back. In comes the vet tech with a syringe, which I thought was going to be to draw labs because we had had that brief interaction where I said, "Are we doing labs?" He never answered. And when the vet tech came back with the syringe, which I thought would be used to draw blood, instead I watched her plunge the needle into Joey and depress the plunger. I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "This is a drug that the doctor ordered." I said, "What is it?" And she said, "You'll have to talk to him about it." Well, that really didn't happen because he wasn't available according to the staff. I took Joey home and he started to slowly decline. I brought him back the next day. His regular vet saw him and immediately did labs, which revealed the elevated kidney values. But by then, all the Joey's vet could do would be to try to do whatever he could. He kept him overnight. He did whatever he could, and then the next day they called us and said the prognosis is poor. You have to make a decision. And obviously, we knew what we had to do. We didn't want to watch him
Right.
with labored breathing, and we could see he was declining. So we had to make that horrible decision. And that was that was the first domino that was knocked over in the genesis of Joey's legacy.
So when you think back to when you were in the exam room and the vet tech comes in, were you ever given any kind of informed consent on what that drug was? Was there any side effects or anything? No.
Tech walked in right in his hind quarter, depressed the plunger, and by then the drug's in his system. No, I was never no conversation, no informed consent, none of that. No.
So Anna, when we go back and we talk about standard of care, I know you deal with a lot of these cases, but have you found, like, why aren't we giving informed consent by our veterinarians? Do you know if it's the law? Do they have to? Why aren't we giving these warnings?
Yeah, generally speaking, yeah, you should be given these warnings, especially because you need to make basically, as it says, you have to give informed consent to these procedures. Now, it's there are some things, and I'll probably touch on that later, that a vet cannot do if you don't give consent to, generally speaking, in like dental cases, it's considered veterinary malpractice if you want extractions done without having x-rays performed, because a vet can't see, or dentists can't see what all is there. So you can't ask them to do these things without having certain things in place. But there are other things like shots. We talk about like any shots, everything from rabies to all the core versus the non-core vaccines. Most vets just don't take the time to tell you that, while this risk may be small, there is a risk of developing a sarcoma, injection site sarcomas. They happen. I've seen them, in many different cases. I've gotten calls about just about everything. And there are certain vaccines that lead to are more likely to cause a sarcoma than others. But in none of these cases have I heard, or it's not in the records, it's not anywhere in the recollections of the people involved, that they were given informed consent that there's a chance of this happening. And this happens with a lot of procedures. And when I've deposed veterinarians, and it's not to say all vets, but just, many,
sure,
they say that they don't take the time to do it, or they just don't, because it's such a remote chance. And it's very disturbing when you take a deposition like that, like especially like the one I did more recently on dental. We asked the veterinarian, like, did you tell, the pet or the companion animal parents, the clients, that it was that you might break their animal's jaw if you take this, if you extract this tooth. And that's what happened, is it broke the jaw. And the vet said no. And I'm like, well, do you now, after this happened to you? And the answer was still no. And it was just like, why would you not? I mean, even to protect yourself, to say, like, look, this is, you can even say that this is something you really need to do, because it's going to hurt your animal if you don't. But in a lot of situations, these are things that are elective, like the non-core vaccines are elective. And you should be told. I mean, the rabies vaccine, everybody pretty much, I know it varies sometimes for the health of the animal. Like if they don't, if they're not healthy enough to get a vaccine, say they have cancer and their body's already fighting something else, they just don't have enough to form, to devote other systems to form antibodies for things, they can get an exception until they are healthy enough. But for the non-core especially, it seems just crazy to not tell people, like, here's what could happen. I think you should know.
Not only do the majority of veterinarians, and I say that because we are lacking in our homeopathic veterinarians and our holistic veterinarians. So I feel very confident in saying the majority of veterinarians not only don't tell you there's a difference between non-core and core vaccines, but they also make it sound as if you legally have to get those vaccines. And to me, that's malpractice. I don't know if it would be to you. If a veterinarian makes me believe, like when you get a postcard in the mail and the postcard says your pet is due for vaccines, to me that is malpractice, because you're making me believe I have to get these vaccines by law. Do you think that in any way we're going to be able to fight that? Because all of my clients tell me their vet says they have to.
Yeah, but I usually see those cards too in the mail about, like, you're due for this, and it implies it. But I think where the vets kind of get into, I guess, some issues is when they tell you you have to, when in fact, like, under the law, your animal really has to be healthy enough to get these vaccines. And there are and there are other things which I know that Scott's kind of been helping and working towards, to make sure is available, is the titering. To make, because you can over vaccinate. And certainly nobody here is an anti-vaxxer. It's just that when you're dosing the animals, like with these vaccines, when, their bodies may, especially as they get older, they may not be as able to, to perform the functions required to get immune responses and things like that. And they're kept in a protected environment. They're not going to be out anywhere where there's rabies, or exposed to even a chimney where a bat could come through with rabies.
Right.
Yeah, I've seen it all. But I mean, they need to be able, there needs to be some things in place to tell the pet, pet parents, hey, you could have a titer done. Let's see if there's protections that would also, assuage the fears of the government bodies that have mandated everybody, have the rabies vaccines. And so they need to kind of be telling people of these alternatives. And that's come up also even after getting vaccinations, because like we've had animals that were given parvo vaccines that didn't take because they weren't timed properly, and the animal shockingly got exposed to parvo at the vet facility.
Wow.
After this. And so it just, there needs to be a lot more information provided to companion animal parents to let them know, like, here's what your options are. It's not just stamp, you have to do this. It's like, here's the reason why we do it. Here's your options, and this is the decisions that these are the decisions that you can make. And it might just be a time issue that they don't want to take the time, but they don't really have to do that. They could have like little videos you watch. I mean, that they could have lots of different ways if they don't want to take that time to interact with, the people involved. Yeah, there are other ways to making sure to be making sure that they are informed,
to educating them and informing them. It's interesting that you say that the puppy got parvo from the veterinary hospital. What's interesting to me is, so I've had many
allegations that were made.
Yeah,
it was
okay, that's fair. Because of course it is really hard to tell, but I will tell you, I have had many conversations with Dr. Jean Dodds, who is on the panel here and helps with Joey's Legacy and goes through a lot of stuff. And she has told me that in her research that she's done over the years, parvo is the most shedding vaccine. And so it's interesting to me when people, this is going to be hard to say, but boarding your pet at a veterinary hospital to me seems very, I don't think I would want to go on vacation at one of the big hospitals, is my point. And so when those vaccines are constantly be given to dogs and they're running around in veterinary hospitals, I think the environment is very much set up for a puppy to come in and actually get sick because of the timing. There's so many dogs running around right now that get the vaccines and then they just sent on their merry way as if they're protected. It's the same as us. That's the one thing about the coronavirus in humans that has been beneficial for me as someone who's been trying to educate people about how vaccines work in the body, is that people are starting to understand, just because I got a shot in the arm today doesn't mean that I'm protected an hour from now or a day from now.
Right.
But
Or
anyway.
at all, because you may
Or
not,
at
your
all.
body may
My
not
body
have
may
evolved
never.
as immunity.
Yeah. Dr. Dodd said she did a study of a group of puppies. This was many years ago, where this is how they studied the shedding of vaccines. Was they took a litter of puppies and they only gave one puppy the vaccine and then tested them all for titers later, and they all had immunity, but only one was vaccinated. And so that's how they started finding out that the vaccine can shed, and that was what became something that was so important. But trying to get other veterinarians on board and understanding that, which is going to lead me to my next question to you. We're struggling really hard. The goal of Joey's Legacy, Scott, the main goal is to get our laws changed. We got to get these laws changed to hold these veterinarians accountable.
Yes.
My
absolutely.
question is, if we can get more veterinarians to raise their standard, right? If we, as pet parents, the responsibility on us is to force veterinarians to raise their standard, and you get cases, and if we could just get more veterinarians to raise their standard, would that help in court?
Well, yeah, I think it's just that the standard is already there. It's just more of getting other veterinarians to recognize that, well, I guess I should take it in two parts. Recognize that these standards have consequences if you don't follow them. Because everyone has made a mistake in their life.
Sure.
Obviously, and a veterinarian, if they made a mistake, yeah, we all
We
have.
all have.
And sometimes that can be, life ending, and it can be devastating. If they make that mistake, they need to, one, own up to it, and actually recognize that the animals that's where my arguments always with valuation come in, because it's not going to matter if the court, will treat your animal like a toaster. And, what do these standards matter at all then? If they, if they're, oh, here's $50, go get a new animal.
Right.
That's not how we treat them. We spend thousands and thousands to bring them back to health. I would throw out my toaster when it breaks. I would never do that with my
Right.
animals.
Right.
But I think, recognizing that the standards of care, these are basically like nationwide. Like, it's different. Like for attorneys, the difference is why we have to go to individual attorneys is because, or in your location, in your state, is because the laws differ drastically in many situations. But the standards of care for companion animals especially, is usually nationwide. So if you go, to Dr. Dodd's, you're probably going to expect that the standards of care are going to be the same as if you go, here in Chicago somewhere. They're going to be pretty darn similar. They should be, because there is that, the information is known to all of them, or should be known to all the accredited schools. But getting the veterinarians to recognize that standard and then hold themselves to that standard and hold others in the veterinary industry to that standard. Because one of the biggest problems we have in getting the cases reviewed is that veterinarians in the same locality, like I say, I have a case here in Chicago, I go to another veterinarian in Chicago, they're not going to want to say anything. They do not want to testify. And I've even had them testify under oath that they don't want to do that if it's somebody close, in their locality, because it does impact. I don't think they came out and said business especially, but it impacts their relations, because many of the specialists, those held to an even higher standard than a general practitioner veterinarian, the guy, or the one you go to after the GP has taken on something they shouldn't have and broken your animal's jaw. They right. don't necessarily want to talk about, what happened to the animal in that locality, because they may rely on those places for referrals or for business back and forth, and they don't want to be blackballed, in the community. And so that's why we often will have to go out of state, somewhere else. But it shouldn't be like that. It really should be that if a veterinarian, is seeing that another veterinarian, is not performing to the level they should be, they need to call them out. Because a lot of the disciplinary boards, which even judges get that confused. I had a judge very recently say, well, why don't you just take this up with the disciplinary board? It's like, well, one, that's a totally different avenue. Okay, that's not the civil avenue. We're not even supposed to use them against each other. It's you can't use a disciplinary action to further a civil cause, and vice versa. It's not supposed to work like that. They're independent tracks, but two, the disciplinary boards, at least here, have not historically been that effective in changing any of the behaviors. And it's the only thing that's really going to change it is if there is monetary accountability. because the law can't
Yes.
give you, what you want back. I mean, I'm sure Scott would have, given anything to have Joey back, but that's the law can't give you that. They can only give you compensation, and compensation is it's a far cry from what you had, but it's more, even though civil law is not supposed to be punitive, it really is the only instrument of change, because
Right.
most of the veterinarians are employed by businesses. The businesses are the ones that are accountable for the vet's actions and have to pay out of pocket. And if they stand to lose something monetarily, they're going to educate the workers. They're going to make sure that the veterinarians are held to that standard of care.
Agreed. I think what my concern when we're talking about standard of care is that I think there's, or maybe I should ask you this. If we had one of the vets on tonight, this might help, but so you might not be able to answer this. When you talk about standard of care, are you talking about written standard of care, like absolute out of written, like we can use Joey's case, for example. He was supposed to have a blood test. The drug company actually says a blood test should be taken to make sure the kidney level, correct, Scott?
Yes.
So that would be written, to me, that's written standard of care. That is obvious, right?
No, here's the thing. Standards of care are not written really anywhere. They're kind of things that are developed over the course and scope of the work of the veterinarian. Now, I will say in Joey's case, there was like a FDA black box label, like on the Convinia. Like you can look at the manufacturer's instructions, and they call it black box. I'm sure there's other terms for it, but
Sure.
It says do not use with those animals whose kidneys are compromised. It says it right on there.
Right.
But
right.
if you ask Scott, did they ever tell you about this? Of course not.
No.
Did they hand you that? No, they didn't.
Right.
There was no informed consent there, because like there may be a situation where there is somebody who's looking at a black box warning and saying, all right, well, we have no other options. We may have to do this just to try to save the life. That's a different scenario than somebody who didn't even bother to read it, didn't bother to check the blood. But as far as like the things that should be done, you often go to textbooks, like you go to veterinary textbooks, if you want to call it written, sort of like that. But then most of the time, the veterinarians who are testifying, they base it on their experience, years in practice, and what is required, their continuing education courses, which they are required to take, just like attorneys, just like most professions. You have requirements, you have to take them. And you're supposed to then gain knowledge that will help you stay current in your field. Now, that's why they don't really have anything truly written, like a protocol, like this is exactly what we do. Sometimes, there may be something written in a vet clinic that this is our standard, here's what we do, there's check boxes. But as far as the standard of care, that's something that's a little bit nebulous. It's something that's why you get why you have experts with different opinions, because it's not, clearly written in, somewhere.
But that's what I think is the problem, is that the standard of care is going so low. It is so low. Vets are in a weird defensive way for them. They're taking on too many clients. They're busy. They're also, in their defense, also they're trying to, from a financial standpoint, you have a pet parent who's like, well, is there some way we can do this cheaper? And so little by little, the standard of care is just being chipped away. And that's my fear, is that then I can find 5 vets that say, yeah, I probably, under those circumstances, I probably would have done it that way too, which is why I feel like there needs to be a written standard of care that is like at the very basic level. These things should have been done. And
I agree. There should be something much more concrete, especially for certain set procedures, like with veterinary, or with veterinary dental. Like I was just they finally have articles out there that say, look, if you don't take x-rays before you extract, you're committing malpractice. It's pretty straightforward. But there are some people, they'll still make arguments, like if it's an emergency, well, that might be different. But clearly, there's certain things that should actually, should absolutely happen. But with standards of care, a lot of times you're just going to textbooks, you're going to what people have done, in the past. But there is a concept in law that is important to know, because it may be applied differently in every state. But the industry itself can be too low. The standards can be too low. You can actually hold the entire industry saying, like, look, these standards are too low for the industry. And you
Yeah.
can still find malpractice in situations like that. It's not as used in the courts, but it is available. So if they were to let these standards slip so low, basically as self-protection, that's not allowed, because those concepts just it goes against the fairness, the notions of fairness,
Yeah.
good faith,
Well,
fair play, that kind of thing.
because just from my experience, the standards are so low. You'd given the example of the veterinarian who isn't changing the way he does something.
Yeah.
I nicked a dog one time and changed my whole way of doing things, right? So and that's not a dog who got his jaw broken. The fact that they don't learn from their mistakes and move on, that's what raises the standard of care. One vet makes a mistake, he changes the way it goes, and you continue on that way. But it just doesn't happen that way. And it comes right back full circle, because our pets are only worth the amount of what you paid for them. And so why should I bother spending the time doing all of this if it's not going to cost me anything? And it breaks my heart to think somebody who went all the way through veterinary school and cared that much would lower the standard of care just simply because they're busy and they get in the habit of it. They become complacent. I've seen it over. You talk about the cat that got their leg cut off for sarcoma. I was witness to a cat who lost his leg, not from sarcoma, wrong leg, got hit by a car and they accidentally did the wrong leg. But I just wish there was a way to get the standard of care up so that it would be easier to win these in court, because I think the standard is too low. I think the industry standard is too low. Giving a vaccine, for example, to a dog who has seizures is considered, like, especially rabies, when you talk about a rabies vaccine, because it's required by law. And even though the vial says, but every vet out there would still give the rabies vaccine.
Yep.
So
at that point, if there's like a contraindication is what they, kind of the word they use to say, like, look, if it says on the manufacturer's label, you shouldn't be using this on this dog or that dog or what have you, then yeah, they better explain why they're using it. They better explain to the pet parent, yeah, here's why we're having to do it. And the pet parent then needs to either, the vet should know the law that says if an animal is not healthy enough to receive this vaccine, because that exists almost everywhere. I mean, you would really have to check. I would be pretty pressed to see if that didn't exist somewhere. I mean, even on mandatory things, it's there. If it would hurt the animal, they're not going to do it. They're going to provide a different way. But yeah, there needs to be a lot more informed consent for sure. But there's another area I did want to mention too about the standards of care, because in some instances, general practice there's different veterinarians. So there's certain veterinarians that have gone through extra school, extra training to become what's called board certified. So they maybe are veterinary dental, maybe they're cardiology, or various different internal medicine, various different specialties. They cannot call themselves a specialist unless and until they've passed those boards. But some general practitioners are taking on the roles of or just doing these, maybe, thinking that they could do it, but they really can't. But there's some interesting dialogue back and forth on what standards then they are held to, because, we've had experts argue that, like, look, in that situation, if you're a general practitioner, you are clearly, and you're not qualified to do this, and you still do it, then you're still going to be held to that standard of the
board certified.
Yeah. Right, as you should be, because, like, this is something that you should at least know what you don't know, and know that, like, hey, I can't do this. I'm not a cancer specialist. You need to go see somebody that knows cancer or something like that. So there are a lot of different areas in the standards of care that are nuanced but very important, and a lot of veterinarians should probably be more educated on how those apply in their own practices.
Yeah. Scott, can you, just for some of our listeners, I know that you do a podcast where you do the whole story, but can you share a couple of examples of some veterinary malpractice? I know you get emails all the time, so there's probably numerous of these, but maybe share a couple of, you don't have to give the names or the whole story, but just some of the stuff that we're seeing that are coming across in veterinary malpractice. Maybe that'll help our listeners be a little more cautious as to what they're doing.
Well, the most common inquiry we get is regarding a dental cleaning that went bad. Most of the time, it's over anesthesia. The patient was over anesthetized. Nobody noticed the dial was on 5 instead of 2, or something like that. By the time they realize that the patient's in cardiac arrest, they try to revive the patient. They fail, so the patient passes. Uh, another one, another situation that is too common are situations where the patient it goes in for a neuter or a spay. The sutures aren't tied tightly enough. Uh, they start bleeding internally, and by the time it's recognized, it's too late. The patient passes. So these are things that are, you know, should be avoidable. They are avoidable if the staff and the veterinarian pays closer attention.
Right.
So those are a few. Those are the two of the more common things that we see. Uh,
So
let-
I had talked to you about that a long time ago. So I met Scott through my podcast. I brought him on because I was very interested in this because I've witnessed veterinary malpractice many times, too many to even think about because it's so heartbreaking. But when I first met you, you had told me that a lot of what you get is the dental and the anesthesia. And so I don't know if I told you this, but I went to a bunch of my veterinary friends and asked them if we could come up. Now, these are assumptions. I'm certainly not saying this has happened in every case, but we wanted to know, when I asked them, I said, why do you think it's happening? I had my theory based on, I used to do a lot of vet dentals. That was my main job. I did dental cleaning for the vets. So I had my theory, and I wanted to know if these vets agreed with me as to why that happens. And they all agreed that they thought that was the problem. And I will tell you what I think it was. I think that dental cleaning, from a veterinarian's mindset, as far as it being a major surgery, something that the vet tech can't do or shouldn't be doing, it's kind of minimized in the veterinary world. Oh, he's here for a dental, and they kind of push him through. And then they put the vet tech in charge of the anesthesia machine, and it should not be the case. And so the vet leaves the room. The vet tech, and a lot of vet techs they're not even licensed to even be able to use. Most vet techs in this country are vet techs, and they're doing a lot of vet tech stuff, but they're not licensed. They're not RVTs, registered veterinary technicians, and they shouldn't be running the anesthesia machine. And I think that is and all of the vets that I spoke to agreed. They thought that was probably why that's happening, is that the vet techs are putting in charge and they don't really know. And when you're, scaling teeth, believe me, you're down in there and you're trying to pay attention, and the machine's over here. So, to be constantly looking, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be, but I'm saying you have to be trained to do that, or have someone monitoring. If you think about from a human standpoint, one person monitors that machine. The surgeon isn't doing his job and monitoring the machine. You have an anesthesiologist. And so I would say to our listeners, be darn sure that that's happening if you're getting your pet under anesthesia for teeth cleaning. Because what was so interesting to me is how many more cases are coming across for dental cleaning under anesthesia versus a neuterer or a spay that's under. Why aren't those dogs? Why aren't we having so many of those dogs dying under anesthesia? So that was just something I wanted to point out, because I think people go in all the time to get non-anesthesia, and to find out that that's the biggest thing that you're being sent is heartbreaking.
Yeah.
On the subject of practice below the standard of care, I pulled up the Florida statute that relates, and this is the language that the Florida Board of Veterinary Medicine is supposed to base their decision on when determining if there's a violation of this statute. So here it is. Being guilty of incompetence or negligence by failing to practice medicine with that level of care, skill, and treatment, which is recognized by a reasonably prudent veterinarian as being acceptable under similar conditions and circumstances. So like you were saying, if these other vets would have, no, I never would have done that, okay, so that meets the criteria.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
Of course, they never, rarely
Yeah.
discipline firmly and fairly. That's another subject. I'll save my rant about vet boards for another time.
You can include me in that rant, Scott.
Me too. I'll go too. But that kind of brings up the point we talked about earlier, is that a lot of times you have to go out of state to get a vet. There's no way you're going to get the vet down the street to look at a case and go, yeah, I wouldn't have done that. There's no way. There's way too much at stake for them, right? Their reputation.
Right.
And now you're battling with the guy down the street. No one wants to do that.
One of our new vets that just joined us practices in Alabama. And she said, I'm happy to join you. I know there's a problem, but there's one condition that I won't agree to. And I said, what is that? She said, do not give me records to review from a veterinarian that is anywhere near me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I said, I'll give you California,
I
Washington.
don't blame her, to be honest. I understand the fear, and I don't blame her. I mean,
do too. Absolutely.
there's cases like death threats. I mean, you're talking about going up against somebody who could lose their veterinary medicine, their license,
Right.
and they could lose their job. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't, but I'm saying that there is a safety concern that these veterinarians have. It's not that they're bad vets, that they recognize, is this something I really want to do? Is come up against my colleagues and say that they're doing something wrong, even though they do know. Like, I commend her greatly. So, and please, just tell her I support her being kind of silent and doing outside of her area. Yeah. It's scary. It's a really scary world we live in right now.
But I'm with you guys. I really think I think you're onto something, Carrie, as far as having some of these general standards put in writing, because I think they should be, because it would take the pressure off the vet.
It would, exactly.
You could review the records. The only thing you have to watch for is like when records are fudged, because the biggest problem we have in the records is that the records are not, one, they're not usually conveyed to people at the time that they're done. It's usually like weeks later, and these entries aren't always made the same day. And we've seen records magically change. Like in that rare instance when somebody did get the records, and then, because I always tell people, please get the records, not just the invoice. They're going to give you the invoice, but tell them you need the record too, to keep it, especially if your animal might have to go to emergency or something. You want to have it with you all the time.
Yeah.
And so you get them. And then lo and behold, when it comes time, to litigate, magically we found some other stuff. And look here, the surgeon explained exactly what happened here. And it's not at all close to what was there, or it doesn't include some of the key conversations that were had, or the restrictions that might have been put on them. So it does matter. Oh, and one other thing too, for the spay neuters, I just wanted to point out for anybody who's listening, don't leave your animal after a spay neuter overnight at the facility unless there is someone there to monitor them, because and this is an area where this is one of those rarer areas where fraud comes up, is if a vet clinic tells you they're going to be there all night or somebody's going to be monitoring, make sure that that's a true statement, because that we've found in a couple cases now that has not been true. That I
don't know if it's this in every state, but I do know in the state of California it has to be posted that there is somebody there, or that there isn't somebody there. So you have to post that somebody isn't there. And I 100% agree with you as a vet tech. I wish wasn't going to say what I'm going to say right now. We would come in the morning and pets would pass away in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Quite often. And honestly, like looking back on it, I do think it's from the stress of being there alone in a cage and panicking and no one there to stop the, calm the environment down, because you get 3 or 4 or 5 dogs with that kind of energy, you can really create a stressful environment. And when an animal has just been spayed or neutered or for any reason, so you really, really need to find out. And I hate to say it, but there are places that will say they do have 24-hour care and they do not. So I take your pet home. Take your pet home, because to me, the worst thing that can happen is you'll notice something's up and you can always take them back to the emergency room, or if you're not comfortable doing it, there are 24-hour care emergency rooms and someone's there. Right. So you can transport your pet into those environments for sure. So, but that I know kind of takes us off, but I know we are talking to pet people and I'm always trying to give them tips. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because I can't tell you how many times we would walk in and animals would have passed away, and I don't think they would have if there would have been somebody there. So that's why even in my little boarding facility, I can't not have somebody there 24 hours because it stresses me out. I don't ever want to walk in and see those kind of horrible things that happen. So, so when we talk about getting the records, Dr. Jean Dodds has told us before, I think every veterinarian that has been on the roundtable before has told us that it wouldn't be unreasonable to expect to get those records within 24 hours. So while we can't expect a veterinarian in the middle of their day, if they've got emergencies and stuff, to stop and write a full report, but all of the veterinarians, I believe, have said that they would expect you to get those within 24 hours, and you should get all of your records. Yeah. So in case you don't know what's going to go on, don't feel bad. I think that's the hard part for people is they feel bad asking for their records, right? It feels accusatory, like you're accusing the veterinarian. And I don't think that's what it is, as much as you just want to have good records, and you should get them all the time. Right. It doesn't have to be only when you expect that there's a problem. Right. Start that right away with your veterinarian, and then they won't feel the pressure when something's bad. If every time they see your pet, you get full records from them, then when something does go wrong, you'll have a history.
Yeah. Plus, you should have a file. Let's say you did need to go to the emergency room. Let's say something did happen. You would at least have the file there. They wouldn't have to wait till the next morning till somebody shows up at the vet clinic so that they could actually get them faxed or sent or what have you. Yeah.
Without those records, do they have a chance at all in winning a case?
Without veterinary records at all? Unless it's something like clearly obvious, like the wrong arm, or, wrong paw, wrong leg, amputation. It's really hard because there's really then nothing for a veterinarian to review. That's the other part where when an animal has passed under questionable circumstances, a lot of times people don't know to get a necropsy performed. And it's something, because you're like, what? You've just lost your animal, and the first thing somebody slaps in front of your face is, oh, here, take him to cremation. Well, no, because you want to find out if there's anything you can learn. Now, it may not turn up any information, but it may. Right. And then, because I first learned about, animal necropsies really when we were dealing with animal shooting cases, because you could see the directionality of the bullets and that, but it became obvious that these were very useful in proving, cruelty cases, proving, malpractice cases, like the sutures you can see in a necropsy if they were not done properly, but you're not going to be able to see that if in fact, the body's cremated very quickly.
We just had on the show, Scott, you'll remember, I can't remember his name, but his dog passed away at a boarding situation from one of these apps. Well, it still bothers me to this day that the veterinarian told him he couldn't do a necropsy because the animal was already put in a freezer, and that is not true.
No, not at all.
But the veterinarian told him that, so he never did a necropsy, which would have been probably very helpful in his case. But he asked for it, and the vet said, oh no, we already put him in the freezer, so you can't do it. Which just made me start thinking this guy is trying to hide something, which I don't really understand unless he had some kind of relationship with the boarding facility and he was trying to push it under the rug, which I hate to just assume that, but I don't know why else a veterinarian would try to talk you out of doing a necropsy, especially since it didn't happen under his care.
Right. There was a relationship.
Yeah. There was?
Yes.
See, I know. I've been in this industry a long time.
It's pretty interesting. In Illinois, they actually have some consumer fraud laws related to animal cremations and things like that. So even when it's not a necropsy type situation, but if an animal is sent for cremation, they need to let you know if it's private or if it's group or things like that. They can't make misrepresentations. Yeah. But as far as the necropsies, I'm sure that every vet knows about them. That's how they learned, about these animal anatomies. But it's very disturbing when it's not recommended, or I wouldn't even say recommended, just offered to say like, hey, it doesn't have to be done here. It's certainly something we can send to a third party to get a fair assessment, and they can tell all sorts of things. They may not be able to tell like certain chemicals that may have dissipated in the blood or things like that. But honestly, even it helps a civil case if you have taken those steps to see, because a vet who would intentionally withhold that information or sending the body could be in trouble for spoliation, which is
Yeah.
basically, just a legal word, for destroying evidence.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think that he was trying to hide some evidence. But for any of our listeners that are listening, a necropsy it's an autopsy on a pet. So it's basically the same thing. It's just called that. So if you have that opportunity and you have questions, don't let a vet talk you out of it. Get that done if you can afford it, if you can do it, if you think there's, something that's just more evidence to help with the situation, right? Like you can't get the records, get the necropsy if you can. Those are highly recommended to help you fight in any cases that might happen. So we know we need to get the laws changed. That's why we continue to fight every week and every day that we're here. Anna, how long have you been doing animal law?
Oh gosh, it's got to be like 15 years or so. I mean, I think it's become a much bigger part of my practice over time. Like when I started out, I was in patent law because that's where you put people in science. But I learned about animal law when I was working out in Washington D.C. area.
Yeah.
You kind of get exposure to all sorts of law, and I really really wanted to do that as my career. And so when I moved back to Chicago, after I got married, and it was like, wow, I could do this. And I had a great teacher, Amy Breyer. She was the best, and she now lives in California. She's incredibly lucky.
Yeah.
but I mean, I had people I was able to learn from and, kind of get things moving here. And
Yeah.
Illinois was a good community for law,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Well, so you've been doing animal law for 15 years. Aren't you a billionaire yet?
Yeah, I wish. Yeah, my long-term investment plan remains the lottery.
Yeah.
Because I don't think anyone goes into animal law to be a bazillionaire. I think
Yeah.
you do it, and you can make a living. You certainly won't make anything close to like what patent law or other types
Right.
tax law makes, but you're trying to change things. And
Yeah.
like for me, the biggest issue is valuation, because my biggest fear in all of these malpractice cases is that most of the states, or I should say a lot of it, the biggest trend is that the states will recognize that if you had to spend money to bring your animal back to health, they'll reimburse you that money. But when you get into cases like where you're dealing with maybe a vet who took out a prostate when they were supposed to be taking out a cryptorchid, testicle, I mean, those kinds of damages, tens, 20s, 30s, $50,000. A vet who may have done that, my big fear, and things that are, that are scary that can happen in this and other cases where they've made a very big mistake, and the damages, maybe $60,000 or more to bring that animal back to health. That if we don't get that valuation up, it just gives incentive to anyone, a veterinarian, whoever's there, to say, well, too bad Fluffy died. I'm sorry, here's $200. I'm so glad, and never, you would be none the wiser that you could have saved Fluffy, or, you might have had an opportunity to. When the person in control of it has an incentive to just have your animal killed rather than pay the damages to bring them back to health. And that's my biggest problem with the Georgia case that had come out about it, where they were allowing the damages, the tens of thousands of dollars to bring that animal back to health, but they didn't want to give compensation for the loss of the animal, the bond there. And that's where I think it absolutely has to change, or else you're going to put some disincentives in there and actually incentives for fraud.
So you had brought that up in a previous, and I remember after listening to you say that, because I think as a pet lovers as we are, and the only reason I brought up that you're not a millionaire or billionaire,
I wish.
I wanted people to realize that we have to fight not just for our pets, but also these attorneys who are really putting out. The reward will be when the laws change. That's your reward. That's your payment, and that's Scott's payment, and so we continue to fight. But when you brought that up on a previous podcast or roundtable, I sat and thought about it and thought, oh my God, I like to think that we live in a world where no one would ever have a dog on their surgery table and go, oh shoot, I just removed the prostate. That's going to be expensive. Or I could let him bleed to death and that's going to cost me $200 and my time that I just spent. I sat with it and thought, she is absolutely right. That's a whole nother reason I hadn't even considered, is to prevent that from happening. And and we like to think that all veterinarians are these great, fabulous people, but as Lauren Turner has brought up about the veterinarian who was just charged with having sex with animals, we know that is not always the case. And so we have to get these valuations up really high. They have to be higher than it would be than letting him let that animal die. It has to be in the 40s and 50s and 60s and hundreds and thousands of dollars so that he saves that pet's life, because it'll cost him more not to.
Right. And actually, you can read like a Marty Becker's article, I lied and a pet died. I mean, sometimes it's just panic, and these are not bad vets. These are like well-known, respected veterinarians that as they're, into their career, they realize the mistakes they made earlier or the panic that they may have felt earlier. And it's just something that you have to have a disincentive, or else, human nature, again, a mistake can lead to something worse. If we don't if we don't take the path of least resistance should be to save the animal, to do everything you can
to save him. It should be your instinct. And I think part of the problem, we could do a whole podcast on this, and maybe I will, is that when you look at, my son's in medical school actually in Chicago right now, and he has to go through so much rotations and years and years, and then when he gets out of medical school, he's not just going to go open private practice and be a surgeon and all of these things that he has to do. So in a lot of ways, if we're going to get the standard of care up, we have to get our veterinary schools to have the same standards as our human medical schools have. And I know not everybody wants to hear that because it's very expensive, but in some respects, a lot of these mistakes are, like you said, I lied. And with Dr. Marty, what he talks about is some of these are just mistakes because they're not being trained well enough. Mm-hmm. You go through veterinary, some veterinary schools don't even have you work out there. And you're just, and then as soon as you graduate, you can open private practice as a veterinarian who's had, maybe a year or 2 years of working in the field, and then they're doing surgery on your pet. So there's a lot we need to change, but the focus of Joey's legacy is to change the laws. Where are we, Scott, with what's going on? So
Well, we talked about the tighter laws earlier, that we've got that in at least 8 or 10 states right now that we're working on that. We have our Tennessee attorneys working with legislators right now on that. Anna and I had a brief interaction about it. We've got Florida. One of our attorneys is a lobbyist there. He loves the idea, so he's working on that.
Good.
New York, another state that we're working on. And, obviously the goal, as I said earlier, is 50 states.
Yeah,
50
absolutely.
Titles.
So real quick, titers, what we're talking about is one of the biggest things that we discuss in veterinary malpractice is the use of the vaccine, the overuse of vaccines without using science that can show, and that's called a titer test. So it's a blood test that your pet can have run, and it checks to see if they have the antibodies to protect them without needing to be over vaccinated. So that's something that Scott's been involved with trying to get, Joey's Legacy is involved with trying to get all 50 states, so that when your pet is due for a rabies vaccine, you no longer just get the vaccine, but you can run a titer. And we have Delaware and Tennessee, right? Tennessee almost.
Tennessee's in progress like the rest of the state. The only state that's have been able to enact the law is Delaware.
Okay. So Tennessee will be right behind them. I think Florida will be next, right?
I think Florida, actually, based on my conversation with our lobbyist attorney, who's a huge animal advocate, part of the animal law committee in Florida. And so I'm sure he's going to run full force with it. So, as long as we get it all done in all the states, that's all good.
Anna, what about Illinois? Come on.
Well, yeah, I'm not a lobbyist. I don't know. It's not my shunning personality. Just it doesn't set me up to be. You have to be likable. You have to be like Scott to be a lobbyist.
I need to find some lobbyists.
There are some people here. But
we're not doing it in California either. I'm like, come on, guys.
I think it's like people right now, like the people think that, vaccination, they think you're just an anti-vaxxer and things like that.
I get called an anti-vaxxer all the time.
Yeah. And the thing is like, no, what you're trying to point out is that, like, especially for animals where the vaccines are, really, talk to Dr. Dodds. I mean, she's a, she has virology background, and so sometimes they can be overused. And here, what's cool about titers is that you can use them to show if the vaccine is effective also, because you don't want to go through a round of vaccines and then you might just have the off chance that it just didn't take. So if you find out that you don't have the titers, well then yeah, of course you want to get the vaccine, because you want to get the actual protection there. But that's something that it's kind of a shame, like even with our with everything that's gone on with the pandemic and everything, like we could have been doing titers on all of us to see how effective all this was. But I guess money it wasn't there. But with your animals, you should be able to have that, and it should be part of the normal discussions that you're having with the veterinarian.
It should be standard of care is, oh, you're not here for your vaccine, you're here for your titer. Interesting quick story, not even a story, but Dr. Roman came on many years ago, and she's been a vet for many years. And when she graduated veterinary school, they told her she would have to run a titer on herself.
Wow.
To make sure that because she's going to be exposed possibly to rabies, because she's going to be working with animals, and that she would have to run a titer on herself to make sure that she had the antibodies to protect herself. And so one day she thought, well, why aren't we doing that on the animals? And it was very logical for her to get there. But what was interesting is that was told to her in vet school, but they didn't tell her to do it on the animals. She had to, think about it herself. She's a very, very, very smart veterinarian who now is a big fighter against over vaccinations. So, so Scott, we've got this going on with the titers. What else? What do we have going on? We're working on the documentary, which is our bloodline, basically. Like that's our lifeline.
I'm hoping to get the link from John. John called me today. He said it's pretty much done. A couple finishing touches. And as soon as I get the link, I'll put it in the VetMal group. Everybody can watch it. He's real excited. He's the rock star in the entertainment industry as far as producing and directing these things. So if he says the sky is green, the sky is green.
Yeah,
I trust him totally. So that's the sizzle reel, as it's called, should be out within a few days, I think. And like I said, I'll put the link in so everybody can see it. And then that's just going to be part of the full documentary, which we're hoping will be released in early spring. We know we can bring it to PBS and their millions of viewers.
Yeah.
We're going to try some of the other media channels like Netflix and History Channel, National Geographic, maybe Animal Planet, which is the obvious place, but we'll see. And we'll leave that to John to figure all that out. And we'll see where we go. But, my thing is exposure to the bad actors is the most powerful weapon we have right now until, like Anna said, until valuations are increased to what they should be.
Right.
We have to deal with what we can, exposure to the bad actors, education of the public that this stuff is really going on. If you need to ask questions, ask your vet as many questions as you need to. Just be aware that vet boards are not your friend, generally speaking. They're going to side with the accused.
Yeah.
And that's just some of the things we're trying to mitigate by doing what we do. I do have a question for Anna if we have time, Carrie.
Yes. Actually, I have a question that was coming across too.
Okay.
The only problem is it was for one of our veterinarians, but I might be able to help a little bit. But in the meantime, ask Anna and I can read this a little bit.
Okay, so this is a point of law. So in Florida, one of our attorneys successfully argued a breach of bailment case against the veterinarian. And it seems to me that the argument is much easier to demonstrate breach of bailment than veterinary malpractice. Because my understanding is I turn over possession of my property, and I'm always going to use air quotes when I talk about pets and property because we know it's all nonsense. When I turn over my property to the veterinarian, and the veterinarian has a duty of care to my property and to return my property in the same condition that he or she received it in. Is that correct?
That's generally bailment, but I think that the difference with professional malpractice is that you're usually bringing your animal in to have an improved condition or something, if your animal's sick, you're wanting them returned better than when you came in. So while bailment is something that you would typically see for, like, let's say you stored your goods somewhere, or you had somebody took your machine that you used to make things, and they used it, they got to return it to you in the condition that you gave it to them in. It just doesn't seem, I know it's been used here in Illinois as well, in certain cases, but it just doesn't seem to fit the same standard as professional malpractice, because usually a bailment doesn't require any kind of specialized knowledge. It just is more like an ordinary negligence case. Whereas when you have a professional malpractice, there's, knowledge, like you can't just throw this, property in the corner and expect it's going to be okay. You got to actually, use the knowledge that you gained in veterinary school to do the assessment and provide the care and, provide, I guess the diagnosis. I guess it's a subject for another talk or another discussion in the future, but remind me to talk about waivers of liability that we've seen here. There is a problem with them in the professional fields when it comes to public laws, but there are differences. And, I have seen it here too, bailment. And I still see some, judges that don't understand why we have to waste our time with malpractice for animals, which is, it's like, well, because it's an entire industry. And this is like a $99 billion a year industry animal, a companion animal. So this is not something small. It's not, just storing.
Vets are charging a lot. Someone else had brought it up. I don't know if it was you, Anna, but someone else had brought up, you're charging my animal as if he's not just a toaster.
Right.
So how can you charge me this kind of money and use all of these expensive equipments that you say, and I'm not saying that vets are overcharging, but you're right. It's what it costs. So, but you're not, I mean, a toaster doesn't cost that much to fix.
Right.
So it makes no sense to me.
Yeah. It kind of, and it wasn't believe me, I was not the first person to come up with that idea. I think it was like Stephen Weiss he talks a lot about how, if people treated their companion animals like their sofas, all small animal companion vets might as well just shut their doors, because when your animal was no longer healthy or okay, you just throw them away, just like your sofa. You'd be like, all right, I'm going to get rid of the sofa now, get a new one. Of course not. That's why it's pure hypocrisy for veterinarians to not recognize the value of their bond to your animal, because this isn't a situation like it was like years ago, where the only reason people ever cared about these small animals was if they were breeding them for some kind of show, or it's not like that. I mean, most of us get our animals at a rescue. We maybe pay $50, $100, whatever, but our animals are part of our family. They're so much more valuable to us than probably any of our possessions. And that's the big difference. And to not recognize that is, and in my personal opinion, a pure fraud, pure hypocrisy, and just absolutely wrong. Especially when you see that there, I took a picture of it a long time ago, but the AVMA used to advertise, they had it right on their advertising, "We are your other family doctor." And it's like, come on now. You can't say this and then go to court and tell me that this is a toaster.
Yeah.
But I don't believe they use that anymore, but I still have the photo. I use it all the time in my
I think it's great. So
I'm not trying to blast an entire industry. I'm just trying to make it like, to make them realize, like, look, we wouldn't use you if we didn't care this much. So please don't treat us like fools when you've done something wrong. You've got to allow us to have justice in courts, or else justice will go other directions, and you don't want it to go there. Because that's why the Yelp reviews are so strong. That's why people will, blast, horrible comments about veterinarians, because the justice system is not giving them justice. When you make things fair, the justice system will work. It will not work if it is inherently unfair.
True. So I want to apologize to some of our listeners, because some of the questions come across through Facebook, which I can see, but apparently there was a couple that I guess got emailed before or during while we were communicating. So I didn't get a chance to see them. So if it's, I want to make sure I respond, because I think that these animals who have lost their lives are really important. So Kathy, the only problem with your question is I think it would have been best for one of our veterinarians. And also when she types the question, it says, when I rushed Coco Kitty back to the veterinarian. So I don't know if I'm getting this all the way across, Kathy. So I want to apologize. I promise we'll get your question answered. It just may not be tonight because I need to get some clarification on this and it needs to go to one of our veterinarians. So I'm not going to answer that question, but I wanted to just make sure you know that we have it, and I'll make sure Scott has it, and we'll make sure it gets to one of our vets. And then Tina asks, and maybe both of you guys, I can answer this too. Tina asks, how do you know who to trust? I think that Anna brings up a really good point about cameras, and that she's suggesting to me as a business owner to have cameras, but I'm going to suggest to you as a pet parent to ask the facility that you're going to if they have cameras. Because then I think that helps a little bit. You can't ever know. You're never going to really, really know unless you're with your pet the whole entire time. And I wish that were true. It's just not. I ask people to trust me every day when they hand over their pets to me, but I don't. How would they know? I mean, they don't know me unless they've, and even when you do, you don't know anybody totally that much unless you're with your animal. So I would say that would be one thing. I don't know if you guys have anything else to add to that.
Just the normal. Just always check the state websites. Usually have a list of professions, and you can check to see if there's been any reprimands. And like as Scott and I have learned, and Carrie too, like the state, the disciplinary boards may not be, on the top of their game, but if you do see something like that's mentioned there, take note. That's something to definitely, be heads up, be very wary of, because if it rose to a level of any kind of action whatsoever, by a disciplinary board, with veterinarians, that's probably, huge red flag. Other thing to take a look through is, you can look through lawsuits. Now, something we talked about before, there are a lot of bogus lawsuits that are filed. So it's not, fail safe, but you can take a look and you can always ask a veterinarian, because sometimes a veterinarian's been sued and it's been dismissed out of hand, like to say, look, there really was nothing wrong. They realized that, whatever. But if you see like 5, 6, 7 lawsuits, heads up, there, might be an issue. And, that is something, but you can definitely take a look around, obviously word of mouth, start asking how long they've been there, with the veterinarians who are there, are they, are they the ones that are actually practicing, or is this usually just a place where they get new veterinarians and train them, kind of churn them through and send them out?
Yeah. So we can check for disciplinary action. We can ask if they have videos recording. I mean, I think for me, having the video there is I think it's great. My staff knows it's on. It's something that I don't think my staff's ever going to do anything, but it just gives peace of mind to everybody that it's available. So I think those things, Scott, I mean, you've been kind of inundated this. What do you think?
We've been trying to get one law passed in Florida. I'm hoping to do it with this, with Ralph, our lobbyist attorney. The sub vet that maltreated Joey was on probation at the time for a case that he mishandled 3 years prior. His probation had another few months to run. And so we're trying to get a law passed. All licensed veterinary facilities must post the status of every practitioner at that facility, active and clear.
That'll
probation.
Yeah, that would be huge.
That would be huge.
Had I known that, I can't say I would have walked out, but I certainly would have questioned, why is this vet on probation?
Yeah.
And of course, that's all in the public record on the myfloralicense.com website.
Yeah.
That kind of goes to Anna's point earlier about a sign that says, there is somebody here overnight, or there is not somebody here overnight, or I don't know if it was you or Carrie, one of you mentioned that. And that's kind of the same thing, full disclosure, which, so we're still working on that. There's lots of things that need to be done. Unfortunately, we need an army of people to join our mission. We have more and more people joining that are saying, hey, what can I do to help? And they are taking on responsibilities. We've got a few vets that have contacted me. Hey, I heard about you. tell me more, I might be willing to join you and help you with what you're trying to accomplish. I just got a new South Carolina attorney who is a former animal cruelty prosecutor, uh, and love to have him on. Glad to have him on board. So as more and more people hear about Joey's legacy, I think this is just going to continue to blossom and blow up, and the good things are happening. I just want to repeat for those that didn't hear. Uh, had someone come to me from Colorado this week with an inquiry about malpractice with her pet, and 99% of the referrals we get from Colorado are from one of our attorneys in Colorado, who of course send their inquiries to us for the vet letter, and then if they get the vet letter, they go back to the attorney, and then they take it from there. But this one person said, "No, I heard about you from my new vet, and they told me about you. They told me to contact you to see if you
Awesome.
could help us."
That's great.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
is. It's great. It's great news.
So more and more of the ethical vets are not have made a decision not to remain silent any longer. And
That's what we need.
so, I think in 3 or 4 years, I think the landscape for animal justice will look entirely different.
I hope so. And I think I love that the way you've done it is like you've harnessed the consumer, if you will, the consumer of the veterinary services. Because believe it or not, consumers actually have a great deal of power. They just often don't know how to use it.
Right.
This
Yeah.
industry would not exist if it weren't for the consumers. And consumers can demand that they be treated fairly and that their losses are in fact given the justice they deserve. And that's where it is. I believe it will change. I know that the law is the last of the party, so
Yeah.
hopefully, everything else will have to come together. But this is the way to get it there is by telling the people directly you can demand more and you really should, and here's how.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap this up. We kept you guys so much later because we had that little problem in the beginning, which I apologize for. I don't really know what that was about. But before we do, I want to make sure you know that Scott had talked a little bit about the documentary that we're working on and trying to get it out there. And there's going to be a little clip coming. I want to make it clear that does not mean that the documentary has been fully funded yet. So I'm always here talking to you that there's still a lot of costs involved in getting the final clips going. If we're going to have change, we need to get this more information out. So we are still asking that you, if you can donate, there's ways you can do it. I personally, aside from donating, I also have signed up with Amazon, and you can get up with their Smile. And so everything you buy, you won't even know you're doing it. But every single time you buy something, and I know the holidays are coming, so a lot of people are going to be buying a lot more. So sign up for that now before the holidays. That could really make a huge difference for Joey's Legacy documentary getting out there. I know that Scott has a lot of decals that can go on your car that help get more of the word out, and that can help. So that's the only thing I can say is if we don't get this documentary out there, it needs to be done because we need more people to be aware of this, to raise the level of what's going on with our animals. So please make sure to make your donations or at least get signed up with Smile on Amazon. It makes a huge difference. You may not think it does, but it makes a huge difference. And then soon we will have that little clip for you guys to see, and you'll see exactly what's going out there. Is you'll be a part of something. You will, knowing that you've donated money to Joey's Legacy, you will always be able to say you were a part of that. And you were a part of something so amazing to make change. And, who knows? You're a part of saving lives, honestly, once we get this out there. So make sure you do that. Scott, where do they donate? On the website, correct?
They can go to the website, joeyslegacy.org, and the last tab is Join Us. That's probably the easiest way to do that at this point.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the next podcast is when?
The next Sunday, Veterinary Tales with Colleen Beasley and me. We're going to interview another human victim of veterinary malpractice. We'll hear her story, and we'll hear if she had an encounter with the vet board and how that went.
And that's next Sunday?
Next Sunday at 8 p.m. So it's either Veterinary Tales or Joey's
Or
Legacy
it's our
Roundtable.
roundtable.
Every
Yeah.
Sunday night, you got a podcast at 8 p.m.
Okay. All right. Anna, thank you so much. Scott, thank you
you, Anna.
also for your
Thank
time.
you.
I know we
Thank you,
kept
Scott.
you late. All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Good
Keep
night.
up the great work.
Oh, you keep up the
You keep up the great
Thanks,
work.
Yeah, we need you. All right. Good night,
Yeah.
you guys. Good night,
Good
everybody.
night.
Thank you for listening. Bye.